thank you for continuing to join us for today's day of conversation. And thank you so much for the most recent conversation on eating disorders and perinatal mental health. It's such an important topic. And like Jen said at the end of it, please, if you're someone looking for more community, check out our online support groups. We've got a lot of really incredible things available. And then as well, mentorship, helpline. There's a lot out there. So if you're feeling alone, just know that you have options. And as well as we're here today, I just want to let you know that everything we do is free. It's run by volunteers. It is open to as many people as we can. Like I said at the top of today's day of conversation, we say yes to as many things as possible. So if you are someone watching who hasn't seen the topic that you're interested in on our schedule for today, first, check out what we did last year. We tried to switch it up, so you might find something related to what you're hoping to see from last year's day of conversation, which are all recorded, available on our website. And then if there's something you're still interested in that you're not seeing, let us know. You can reach out to us at hello@aned.org, and we always want to hear from you. Again, we like to say yes to as many things as we can. And since you met our full staff this morning, we sometimes need some time to do it, but we work hard and we try to do that. And we can only do that because of the support of our community. So if you're someone watching today who's finding some value in this, who's maybe thinking, hey, I should get involved, or I would love to support these really amazing people doing these things to support the eating disorder community for free, you can donate. It would be amazing, and it's a great way to help us make space for more people. And as well, since it is Eating Disorders Awareness Week, we have some cool stickers available too. So this handy QR code right here will take you to our website. You can check out some of the really phenomenal stickers we have available, courtesy of Jason, our Director of Community Engagement, our student ambassadors, and some of our volunteers as well. So check those out. Maybe go stick them around, do some advocacy that way, and show some support to ANID. And if you're not someone who's in a position to donate, that's okay. You can still help. You can still get involved. You're always welcome to volunteer, to use our services. And if you want to give back, it's Eating Disorders Awareness Week. Raise some awareness. Share some posts. Talk to the people in your community. The more we can do to spread the word, let people know the impact that these have and the type of people that they can affect, everyone, the better off we're going to be. So feel free to look to our website, share some of the posts that are out there, share some of your own impressions, just have conversations with the people around you. That micro advocacy, the conversation you have with a friend, you never know where it's going to go, the effect it's going to have. So please, anything you can do, it makes a difference. And a reminder to everyone that as you are watching these streams, you can comment, you can get involved. Keep an eye out for comments from YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. If they're relevant to one of the live conversations, we'd love to bring it in, hear what you're thinking. And again, share, talk to us. We love to hear from you. All right, in just a couple minutes, we're going to get our next conversation queued up, and there's still quite a few more going on through today. We'll be talking about pets and animals, body grief, body shame and stigma, chronic illness, AI. Again, we have so many conversations queued up that if you don't see something you're interested in, I'd be surprised. But also, please do let us know. Reach out to hello@ann.org. And check out our website as well. We have a really incredible learning library, spaces for tons of people to learn, support for caregivers, educators, coaches, folks working on their own recovery, their friends. Check it out. We love it. And as well, if there's something you'd like to see us talking about that we're not already doing so, reach out. Let us know. Okay, now coming up, our next conversation is brought in partnership with FEDUP, who are an amazing organization. So if you're not already familiar, you should check them out. FEDUP stands for Fighting Eating Disorders in Underrepresented Population. They're a trans and intersex collective, and they're filled with just really incredible people we worked with them a while ago to make sure that our volunteer training materials were inclusive, and I've been really impressed with everyone I've met from them. So give me 1 second and you will see them coming up.
I am Jules, he, him. I'm a representative from ANAD, the Association for Anorexia Nervosa and Other Related Disorders, and I'm here speaking with Sam from FEDUP. If you'd like to introduce yourself and just give a little information about what FEDUP does and who you are.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm very excited to talk to everyone. My name is Sam. My pronouns are they, them. I am a team member at FEDUP Collective. FEDUP stands for Fighting Eating Disorders in Underrepresented Populations. And we are a peer support collective that provides a variety of support resources, trainings, advocacy, and education around eating disorders in transgender, gender diverse, and intersex populations. So some of the things that we do are offering support groups for transgender, diverse, and intersex community members. We have a variety of other resources to help folks get care. And we also provide training for providers who work in the eating disorder field or who want to learn more about eating disorders. And in particular, our trainings cover types of competencies that are most helpful for providers in the eating disorder field wanting to best support, again, transgender, gender diverse, and intersex populations.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for being with me here today. One of the first questions that we wanted to ask is how can both externalized and internalized homophobia and transphobia manifest in individuals and how they may treat their bodies? Because I know there have been a lot of people that we work with whose needs we haven't been able to appropriately address because of the different ways body image exists in the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question. And so I want to start off with this idea of minority stress, which I know gets talked about a lot. So basically, the idea that experiencing systemic oppression is harmful to physical health, mental health, and how people experience their bodies. And that's absolutely something that impacts not only LGBTQIA plus populations, but any group of people subjected to systemic oppression. Something in particular that I think about a lot with this is this phrase that will come up in eating disorder recovery spaces about your body is the least important thing about you. And I know that phrase is well intentioned and can be helpful for a lot of people, but when it comes to the current historical moment we're in, thinking about the way that there is this political and cultural and legal fixation on the bodies of trans and intersex people in particular, and passing laws about what spaces we can and cannot enter and what types of medical care we can and cannot receive, and encouraging the general population to constantly be scrutinizing people to try and figure out if they are trans or intersex or in some way sex or gender nonconforming, and then to regulate not only through the law but through behavior what we can and cannot do, again, based on our bodies. And so if, we are trans and intersex people in this moment, being aware of all of this, the idea that we should think less about our bodies and what they look like and how other people are perceiving them is kind of at odds with this reality and the very specific threats to our safety, and how small differences in how our bodies show up can make the difference between being able to move safely through the world and being recognized, targeted, and harmed in these particular ways. And that level of awareness and experience of oppression, and then kind of experiencing both internal and external surveillance, can definitely impact how people see and treat their bodies. And when you are receiving all these negative messages about your body and you're internalizing them, this can make feeling acceptance, or the things that, again, are commonly talked about in eating disorder recovery spaces, like even body neutrality. It's hard to feel neutral about your body when you have to take a political stance every day about whether you are going to allow yourself to be targeted in these very violent ways, or whether you're going to fight them. So that is something that I think is really important to point out, because eating disorders don't occur in a vacuum. People don't just have eating disorders because of not liking what they see when they look in the mirror, context free. There's all of these other factors that come in terms of how we form these perceptions of our bodies and what factors are impacting how we experience them and the capacity as well as the desire that we feel to care for them.
That resonates with me personally so deeply. I wrote a blog post back in October for Trans Day of Remembrance, because transitioning and like coming out as my true authentic self was so pivotal for me in eating disorder recovery because of exactly what you said. Like body neutrality, or like your body is the least interesting thing about you. That really wasn't helpful for me at the time because I felt so uncomfortable in my own skin in a way I didn't know how to describe. And the only outlet I could find at the time, because I grew up in a conservative town, so I didn't know about like the LGBTQ community, and I didn't know about like transgender people. I didn't know, I hardly knew any queer people at all. So the only outlet I could find to like try to address what I was feeling on the inside was through my eating disorder. And when they always talked about like body image and like focusing on the weight of it or trying to be neutral about it, that never felt accessible to me because that wasn't what I was feeling, but it was the only thing I knew. And so like many, many years later, when I finally found a queer community and started like talking about my body image struggles and things like that, they helped me find my way. And because of being able to come out and be my authentic self and start to feel at home in my body as my gender, that is what helped me reach eating disorder recovery. So for so many organizations to not be able to address that is a severe lack and needs to be. And so I really appreciate like all the work you're doing with FEDUP to help fill that gap.
Thank you. We definitely see that with people not only having eating disorders that relate directly to body image, but also these experiences of feeling like everything is out of control, everything is confusing, and having, something that you do have control over, as well as experiences of isolation leading people to develop and be stuck in eating disorders, and how that can also intersect with when people have internalized depression. Even if they have a clear awareness of their identity, they might feel unable to access community spaces because of discomfort with the reality of who they are and not wanting to be around other people who share that part of themselves. But then not only that internalized oppression, but also that isolation can be really damaging.
I also really appreciate you bringing up the aspect of like safety in one's body, because that has a lot to do with it too. A lot of people I know, and like myself included, turn to like eating disorder behaviors as a means of trying to manipulate our bodies to help fit societal norms about gender. Because I mean, right now, regardless of like how you feel about it or anything, so media is telling us that quote unquote thin is in for women or people who are like feel more feminine and things like that. And so it's understandable that a lot of people who want to fit that mold and kind of pass in a way and just feel safe going out would turn to behaviors that would focus on like restriction, trying to control their body in ways that helps them fit into those societal norms, regardless of how like toxic they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to some level, thinness being popular never really went away, but I know there's additional pressure with the constant promotion of these weight loss medications that seems to be increasing more and more. And something that we also really see with trans people is not just this idea of the thin ideal, but this idea of gendered body ideals, which are generally thin or lean, but there's a specific expectation for what an attractive or normative body for a man or woman would look like. And a lot of people, regardless of gender, feel pressure to conform to those things. But there, again, like you said, can be this additional element for trans people where it's not just I want to feel pretty or I want to feel handsome. It's I want people to see me as my gender, and I want to avoid the violence that can come from people perceiving me as somebody who is a different gender or gender ambiguous. Unfortunately, there is a lot of hostility and exclusion and ways that that can make people's lives a lot worse if they can't fit into those categories in the eyes of others. And that being something where sometimes there does seem to be an experience trade-off between I can, stop doing my eating disorder behaviors, but then maybe I'm going to risk not being perceived accurately in my gender, and then I experience other forms of danger, even if, I'm not experiencing the forms of physical danger that my eating disorder can cause. And I don't say that because people have no pathway to recovery if that's a situation that they're dealing with, but that is something that needs to be considered in the support that they receive. And those experiences of safety and the need for safety and avoiding violence are very real. And I think, to be honest, a lot of cisgender people just aren't aware of that because they've never had an experience of how people treat you or what spaces become inaccessible once you are not clearly perceivable by others as being a man or a woman.
Yes, just as again, speak to my own story, and I think there's a distinct danger when we try to separate human rights and social justice from the eating disorder field, because when I started in recovery and weight regain process, one of the biggest issues for me wasn't so much the process itself, it was that I started to develop breast tissue again. And as a trans man, that was very, very upsetting to me. But it was pivotal for my therapist at the time to allow me to wear a binder. Because then it all of that discomfort with the recovery process, all of it just kind of faded into the background because I still felt like me. And I didn't have to worry about the parts of me that didn't feel like me. And recovery is such an important aspect of being able to be eligible to get top surgery for trans men and non-binary folks that I think having therapists and practitioners be more aware of the need for things like binders and things like that in recovery spaces. It's not a trying to make our bodies smaller. It's not an eating disorder behavior. It's just trying to feel like our authentic self. And if I wouldn't have had that therapist at the time, it would have been a lot harder for me to get where I am today.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that you did have that therapist who provided that opportunity for you to both experience gender affirmation and continue with your recovery.
Yeah, and it brings to mind the other aspect about eating disorders in the LGBTQ community. There's a higher percentage, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I know a lot of LGBTQ folks not only have body image issues that aren't related to things that people in the cis heteronormative culture experience, but also there's an aspect that you mentioned earlier of isolation, bullying, just feeling out, not belonging. And I'm wondering if you have any insight on that and how we can better cater treatment and outreach toward the LGBTQ community.
So I think that you're hitting on something really important with some of both the unique causes of eating disorders in these populations and some of the specific needs in treatment. So FEDUP is very intentional about intersex people being part of the population that we serve because intersex folks are a very not only underrepresented, but also neglected and erased portion of the population. I actually have my intersex flag background behind me for anyone who's watching this. But a lot of intersex people are subjected to coercive and non-consensual medical care throughout our lives based on the idea that there's something fundamentally wrong with intersex people's bodies and there needs to be medical interventions to change them with or without the person's consent. And that those types of medical harm can lead to really significant trauma, which can both further the development of eating disorders and make accessing care in the future, including eating disorder treatment, very difficult. And Additionally, when it comes to the aspects of eating disorder treatment that are really looking at the physiological impacts of eating disorders, that can be something that is really crucial to address, especially both because eating disorders and the nutritional rehabilitation process can come with certain medical risks. And the way that that can be most effectively addressed is if you can compare where somebody is at to where their body should be when they are healthy and malnourished. And it's important to factor in the difference between somebody who is, for example, taking hormone replacement therapy versus somebody of their assigned gender who's not, in terms of, for example, what certain lab values should be when they're healthy. And then for intersex people whose bodies are naturally not going to conform to these binary expectations of what a male or female body would look like, knowing, if somebody has variations in their sex hormone levels, as a baseline, how do you know if differences that you're seeing are related to their eating disorder or are just related to their intersex traits? And that's an area where a lot of times, even when providers want to provide competent care, they haven't necessarily had the training to be able to provide it. So there's a lot of levels in terms of considering these different factors that are impacting eating disorders in this spectrum of the population, and making sure that the experiences are recognized and the care, the psychological care, the medical care, and the community support is competent and going to really address where those needs are.
Thank you for saying that. I think you're right. And like one of our biggest obstacles in providing educated and intersectional care for folks with eating disorders is the fact that there's been this stereotype in the eating disorder field that those who have eating disorders are like cis white female. And all of the research has been done on populations that meet that demographic. A lot of people just don't have the education or knowledge to be able to address like the wider community and majority of people who are actually dealing with eating disorders. Do you have, now this is just a question, like you don't have to have like a solid answer, but are there any ideas or current actions that FEDUP is working with to help provide education for providers in order to provide more competent care?
Yeah, that's absolutely something that FEDUP does. We offer trainings for providers of all types on how to understand the experiences of and provide better care for transgender, gender diverse, and intersex people with eating disorders. We offer a couple open trainings every year, and different either individuals or practices can bring us in to give trainings, and we can also customize them to fit the specific needs and populations that a certain provider or center might work with. We also, a few years ago, published an academic article providing guidelines for doing better research on eating disorders in transgender, diverse, and intersex populations that covers things like how to create more accurate and inclusive demographic questions, and making sure to actually consult with the populations that you're studying throughout the process of developing your research to make sure that the issues you're addressing are actually done in a way that's both relevant and sensitive to those populations. Because as you said, there is a massive dearth of research on what the experiences and needs are of people who have eating disorders who are not going to fit in this very specific and narrow stereotype. And there's an even greater need when it comes to people who are experiencing multiple forms of oppression. So I know I saw a really shocking statistic once on the very low number of studies on eating disorders that included people of color, and the same is true for individuals who have disabilities and chronic conditions that may, interact with their eating disorders in different ways. And we also see ways in which different religious practices influence both eating disorders and eating disorder recovery. So yeah, in general, that is something that's very important to us, and we're trying to support better research and better treatment and better clinician training on how to care for everybody who has an eating disorder.
Having those education tools and like handy like that and available for folks is so incredible. Thank you for all the work you've been doing with that. It makes such a difference in the lives of like the folks who actually experience eating disorders. Because another thing that we all know in the eating disorder field is that not all, but the vast majority of folks struggling with eating disorders or disordered eating have some form of trauma in their past. And systemic oppression makes up such a bulk of that trauma that can lead to like eating disorder behaviors as a form of escape or control or whatever coping mechanism people need at the time. And I'm just wondering, with everything that's been going on in the legislature about like laws attacking trans healthcare, trans rights, like LGBTQ plus community, how can we reach out and provide a safe place for folks to like start the recovery journey or just get extra support during this time?
That's a great question. I think that um, acknowledgement of all of that and the way that it impacts people's experiences in eating disorders isn't adequate, but it's crucial. And I do see a lot of hesitancy sometimes among eating disorder providers and in recovery spaces to talk about those things. There can be this pull to try and keep things apolitical and not bring in the outside world. But I think that what you mentioned about trauma is really interesting because trauma absolutely impacts eating disorders. And it's also very different to consider how does a past trauma that happened years ago and is over now impact where somebody is versus something that is ongoing. So, every day I am getting more information about ways that different states and different organizations are trying to harm and restrict and erase trans and intersex people. And so that's something that any process of healing that a trans, gender diverse or intersex person is embarking on, it has to involve continuous awareness and resistance to that. So I think thinking about, resisting oppression and violence as being part of healing and being a motivation for it, and also having connections with other people who you want to be well enough to fight for. I think those can be really powerful elements of recovery and support that, I don't know, sometimes I think there's a skittishness around that because there's no way to escape that this is political, and attempts to make it apolitical just end up furthering the exclusion of people who, every aspect of our lives is political because of the ways in which, natural aspects of who we are has been politicized by other people. It's not a choice. And so I think getting comfortable with having those conversations and providing those forms of support and understanding why something like body neutrality, which again is great for some people, might not resonate with somebody who feels like, how can I be neutral when my body is under constant attack, not just by, the eating disorder thoughts in my brain, but also, lawmakers in the Capitol and people who, don't want me or another trans person to be able to walk down the street without being harassed. So that's something that is difficult to deal with. But I think the more that it is part of the conversations that we're having and the support that we're providing, then it doesn't have to be insurmountable when we're thinking about being able to provide care that meets people where they're at and incorporates their lived realities.
I think that's something I've noticed too, just the power of acknowledgement and like providing that open space for dialogue about what is going on. Because I know for like a lot of organizations and treatment providers, like there's only so much power they have, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a voice. And speaking up in support of the LGBTQ community, trans people, intersex people, people who are under oppression is so powerful and just like provides that level of relief that like, okay, this is a safe place for me to be. I can belong somewhere. And finding community is so like important when it comes to any kind of recovery, and eating disorder included. And I wonder how we can like best fall places in to be more, I guess, outspoken about that. Because a lot of places and organizations say that they want to be apolitical or they don't want to be partisan, but at the end of the day, a lot of this comes down to like who is being hurt. It's not a political stance to stand up for someone who is being hurt. And how do we make that more accessible?
That's a great question. I think that understanding issues of oppression as something that is all of our responsibility and not just the people facing it And especially thinking about for people who are cisgender and heterosexual, oftentimes there's an opportunity to be in a space, both in terms of a physical space where queer people are not going to have access, and having a level of safety to push back on and disrupt oppressive policies, oppressive speech, and say, hey, that's not okay. We don't do that here. And the more people who do it, the less it's possible to silo and isolate and penalize those who are doing it. And so having that be something that's not just a burden on the people who are experiencing that oppression all the time, I think is very important. And also, eating disorders are social justice issues. That's one of the fundamental values that we hold at FEDUP Collective. You can't consider eating disorders, especially in populations experiencing systemic oppression, without considering those factors. Otherwise, the work that you do is not effectively going to fight eating disorders. And so taking that on as a deeply held value that informs everything you do, and not looking at it as this is about which or any political party that you support, but understanding that oppression is wrong. And if you want people to stop being trapped in the harm of an eating disorder, you have to look at what is causing them to be there in the first place, and what is preventing them from getting better, and what is preventing them from being seen as a whole person who's deserving of rights and safety and the same opportunities as everyone else.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Dylan. That resonates with me a lot, because it is so hard being in a community who's constantly being oppressed and having to continually fight for ourselves. Having people in places with more privilege stand up is such a relief, and can provide that space to breathe that we need, and is so fundamental to reaching eating disorder recovery. I am also very strongly agree with eating disorders are political, especially considering where the thin ideal and diet culture arose from the beginning. It's always been political, and we can't just treat behaviors or mindsets without viewing the larger context. We're getting close to time, so I just want to thank you again for being here today, and end with one more question. And one of ANAD's goals is to provide better, more inclusive, more diverse, and more intersectional care. What steps can we take? What are some basic steps we can take to make that actionable? And how can we better serve the broader community?
So something that I think is more of a thought exercise, and then I'll get into something that's more actionable, is thinking about how, as you were saying, these body ideals come from a very white supremacist patriarchal idea of who is a standard, adequate, deserving person, what types of bodies are considered to fit within existing definitions of health, beauty, and personhood, and what people and bodies are going to be inherently excluded from that. And then how does all of this trickle down into the ways that people are viewing themselves, experiencing internal and external harm, and ending up in eating disorders, and ending up with struggling to get access to competent care? I think that those questions are sometimes bigger than we're thinking. But if you're somebody who does belong to a group that's been oppressed and pathologized, the idea that you could be healthy and whole is sometimes kept off limits, and it's a real fight to even get there. And so putting yourself in the shoes of people who are struggling against that, and then thinking about not only how people treat each other to try and break down those forms of harm and exclusion, but also things that are going to be more built in, like language on websites, language on intake forms, assumptions about relationships, sex, gender, and sexuality, assumptions about what is going to be a relevant or powerful motivator for someone to get better, and ultimately listening to people. And if somebody has a problem with something because it doesn't create space for who they are, listening to that and figuring out how that space can be created. And I also think that when it comes to populations that have been historically, considered to be, let's just say it, inherently pathological. Oppression is about seeing some people as less human, less deserving, fundamentally wrong compared to others. In attempts to remedy that, sometimes there's this idea of, okay, we know exactly like what every trans person or every person of color needs because we talked to one person or went to one training. But in these populations, there's a huge diversity of experiences. And so continuously learning, continuously listening, and allowing there to be that variability and not projecting a narrow set of assumptions onto people.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much for being here. Once again, this is Sam, they, them from FEDUP Collective. You can find them on social media at FEDUP Collective or at their website, fedupcollective.org, to learn more and get involved. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on and letting me talk about what we are doing at FEDUP Collective.